The cruelest fate is not dying once, it is waking up where your nightmare first began. The last thing Eloan remembered was the silence. It was not the silence of peace, nor the silence that followed a storm. It was the terrible silence that came when every voice that should have defended her chose to say nothing at all. The towering halls of Blackthorn Palace had witnessed countless royal celebrations, sacred vows, and glorious victories, yet no one would ever remember the quiet Omega Maid who disappeared within those walls. She had entered the palace believing that honesty could survive among kings. She had left it believing nothing at all. As the cold evening settled over the kingdom, snow drifted across the palace gardens where she had once secretly admired the crimson roses blooming beneath winter frost. She closed her tired eyes one final time, whispering a promise no one else would ever hear. If destiny granted her another life, she would never again mistake silence for loyalty. Darkness swallowed everything. Then came warmth. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the tiny room. Birds sang beyond a cracked wooden window. A ray of morning sunlight rested across her face. Eloan gasped as air rushed into her lungs. Her heartbeat pounded wildly while she stared at the familiar ceiling above her. It could not be. Slowly, trembling fingers reached beneath the collar of her plain dress until they found the small silver pendant resting against her skin. It was still there. Untouched. Whole. Tears filled her eyes before she even understood why. She stumbled toward the narrow calendar hanging beside the door. The date stole every remaining breath from her chest. 3 years earlier. 3 years before she entered Blackthorn Palace. 3 years before her life was quietly erased. She pressed both hands against the wooden table, forcing herself to breathe. Every memory returned with painful clarity. Endless corridors polished until they reflected every servant's bowed head. Noblewomen smiling while hiding poisoned intentions behind jeweled fans. Whispered accusations spreading faster than truth. The imposing figure of Alpha King Kalar standing above the royal court in magnificent black armor, his crimson cloak flowing behind broad shoulders as though the kingdom itself followed wherever he walked. His wolf had frightened everyone. His presence commanded every room. Yet what haunted Eloan most was not his strength. It was the moment he looked into her eyes as doubt clouded his expression. He had not condemned her with cruel words. He had simply failed to believe her. That single hesitation had changed everything. This life would be different. Not because she wanted revenge. Not because she wished to make the Alpha King suffer. She simply refused to walk toward the same ending with the same trusting heart. A sudden knock echoed against the cottage door. Eloan froze. The old woman who had taken her in after her mother's death stepped inside carrying a folded letter sealed with black wax bearing the royal crest. They'd begun recruiting new servants for Blackthorn Palace, the woman said softly. The steward believes you'd make an excellent maid. The letter slipped from trembling fingers onto the table. It had arrived exactly as before. In her first life she had accepted without hesitation, believing the palace offered hope beyond poverty. She remembered the excitement that had filled her chest. She remembered dreaming that hard work alone could change her future. She knew better now. Every instinct begged her to throw the letter into the fire and run as far from the capital as possible. Yet another memory surfaced, one she had nearly forgotten beneath years of sorrow. Hidden somewhere inside the palace lay the truth behind her mother's mysterious silver pendant, a truth no one had wanted her to discover. It was the reason powerful people preferred her invisible. It was the reason every lie had found its way to her door. If she fled, the secret would remain buried forever. If she returned, she might finally uncover the hidden thread connecting her mother's final warning, the palace, and the Alpha King's haunted eyes. Fear tightened around her chest, but it no longer ruled her decisions. Slowly, Eloan picked up the royal letter once again. I'll go, she whispered, her voice steadier than she expected. But this time, I'll enter that palace with my eyes open. Far away, beyond the snow-covered forests, Alpha King Kalar awoke abruptly before dawn. His pulse raced beneath his battle-scarred armor although no battle had been fought. For the 7th night in a row, he had dreamed of a young woman whose face vanished each time he reached for her, leaving behind only unbearable grief and one impossible feeling. Somehow, somewhere, he had already lost someone he had never met. 3 days later, Blackthorn Palace rose beyond the snow-covered hills like a memory Aloan had spent an entire lifetime trying to forget. Its dark stone towers pierced the pale winter sky, crimson royal banners moving in the cold wind above walls nearly 60 feet high. She sat quietly inside the servant's carriage as it crossed the final bridge toward the eastern gate, her hands folded over the small travel bag in her lap. Around her, 6 other young women whispered excitedly about palace feasts, handsome guards, and the possibility of glimpsing the Alpha King. Aloan said nothing. She already knew which corridor led to the kitchens, which staircase servants used after midnight, and which windows caught the first sunlight every morning. More dangerously, she remembered doors she had once been forbidden to open. The carriage stopped in the lower courtyard. Palace steward Orson waited beneath the stone archway with a ledger tucked beneath one arm. Aloan recognized him immediately. In her first life, he had been stern but never deliberately unkind, one of the few people who had occasionally spoken to her as though she existed. That memory made seeing him alive again unexpectedly painful. "Names will be called once," Orson announced. "You will answer clearly and follow instructions." Aloan lowered her gaze when her turn came. "Aloan." His pen paused. "Family name?" "The same question." "The same dangerous question." "None that I use, sir." Orson studied her for a moment before writing something beside her name. Last time, she had been embarrassed by that answer. This time, she understood that anonymity could be armor. The new maids were taken through the eastern servants' entrance, and every familiar detail tightened something inside her chest. The smell of beeswax. The warmth from the kitchens. The distant bells marking the hour. Nothing had changed, yet Aloan had changed completely. She counted intersections without meaning to. 20 steps beyond the linen room stood the narrow passage leading toward the old royal archive. 40 more brought them beneath the gallery where noble families displayed their crests. She remembered all of it. Then she saw something she did not remember. Carved into the stone above a doorway was a small crescent surrounding a 4-pointed star. Aloan stopped. Beneath her dress, the silver pendant against her chest suddenly felt warm. "Keep moving," another servant whispered. Aloan obeyed, but her pulse had already quickened. She had walked beneath that symbol hundreds of times in her first life without noticing it. Or perhaps she had noticed and never understood why it mattered. Now her mother's final warning returned with startling clarity. "Never let anyone in the royal house see what you carry." That evening, assignments were distributed. Aloan expected the laundry wing because that was where she had served before. Instead, Steward Orson frowned at his ledger. "There has been a change. You are assigned to the upper royal floor." Aloan's stomach tightened. "The royal floor? A maid resigned this morning. You will replace her." That had never happened before. The timeline had already changed. She wanted to refuse, but refusing on her first day would draw exactly the attention she needed to avoid. "Yes, sir." Shortly before sunset, Aloan carried fresh linens upstairs. Each step brought her closer to the part of the palace she had once known only from a distance. Royal guards stood beside carved doors. Firelight reflected across polished black marble. She turned a corner and stopped so abruptly that the folded linens nearly slipped from her arms. Alpha King Kaler stood at the far end of the corridor. He was taller than memory had allowed her to forget, broad-shouldered beneath black royal armor marked with faint scratches from years of war. A heavy fur mantle framed his shoulders, and a rich crimson cloak fell behind him. His long black hair rested against the dark metal, while the royal sword at his side caught the firelight. Aloan's body remembered fear before her mind could command it otherwise. Kaler was speaking with 2 councilmen when his words suddenly stopped. His head turned. His eyes found her. For one suspended moment, neither moved. Aloan reminded herself that he did not know her. In this life, they had never spoken. He had never doubted her. He had never stood silent while everything collapsed around her. Yet the Alpha King's expression changed as though he had recognized a ghost. One councilman quietly asked, "Your Majesty." Kaler did not answer. Eloan lowered her eyes and continued walking, forcing each step to remain calm. She passed him without speaking. 5 feet. 3 feet. 1. The instant she crossed beside him, the pendant beneath her dress became almost painfully warm. Kaler drew a sharp breath. Eloan kept moving. She refused to look back until she reached the servants' stairwell and disappeared behind the door. Only then did she press one trembling hand against the silver pendant. Something was wrong. In her first life, the Alpha King had barely noticed her for months. This time, he had noticed her on the first day. Back in the corridor, Kaler remained completely still. The councilman waited uneasily until one finally asked whether they should continue. "Who was that woman?" Kaler said. "A new maid, Your Majesty." "Her name?" A guard checked the assignment register. Eloan. The name meant nothing to him. It should have meant nothing. Yet somewhere deep within him, his wolf stirred with such grief that Kaler had to close his eyes. And from the darkness behind them came the same impossible feeling that had haunted his dreams for 7 nights. Not recognition. Loss. Eloan learned before sunrise that being noticed by a king was far more dangerous than being invisible to one. A senior maid named Mara woke her while the servants' wing was still dark and handed her a pale sage dress, a clean linen apron, and a list of duties for the upper floor. His Majesty requested that yesterday's assignments remain unchanged, Mara said. The words sounded ordinary, but Eloan knew palace routines too well. Kings did not concern themselves with servant assignments. Not unless something had caught their attention. She dressed quickly and hid the silver pendant beneath 2 layers of fabric before beginning her morning rounds. For the next 4 days, she avoided Kaler with deliberate precision. She learned when the royal council met, when the guards changed posts, and which staircases remained empty during breakfast. Whenever footsteps approached from the king's chambers, she found another corridor. Whenever another maid offered to trade duties near the royal study, Eloan accepted without hesitation. In her first life, she had once longed for Kaler to notice her. Now every successful day without seeing him felt like borrowed freedom. But avoiding the king created an unexpected consequence. Kaler began noticing her absence. On the 5th morning, Eloan was polishing a narrow table outside the Western Library when Steward Orson appeared. His Majesty requested tea in the map room. Eloan kept her expression neutral. "I can ask Mara to take it." Orson studied her. "He requested you." Her hand stopped against the cloth. That had never happened before. Did he say why? Kings rarely explain their requests to stewards. 10 minutes later, Eloan entered the map room carrying a silver tray. Kaler stood beside a massive table covered with maps of the Northern Territories. Morning light reflected from the dark metal of his armor. His crimson cloak had been removed, but the royal sword remained at his side. He dismissed the 2 guards near the door with a quiet gesture. Eloan's pulse quickened. She placed the tea on the table. "Your Majesty. You have been avoiding me." The certainty in his voice startled her. She kept her eyes lowered. "I have been performing the duties assigned to me. Everywhere except where I happen to be." Eloan said nothing. Kaler moved around the table, stopping several feet away rather than approaching closer. That restraint unsettled her more than anger would have. "Have we met before?" he asked. Her heart seemed to forget its rhythm. "No, Your Majesty." It was technically true in this lifetime. Kaler watched her carefully. "Then why did you look at me in that corridor as though you were afraid of something I had already done?" Eloan's fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. For one terrible second she was no longer standing in the sunlit map room. She remembered another room, another lifetime, and Kaler's silence while powerful voices turned suspicion into certainty. She forced the memory away. Sometimes fear has nothing to do with the person standing in front of us. Something shifted behind his expression. And sometimes it does. Before she could answer, footsteps approached outside. Eloan instinctively reached for the tray, but the movement pulled the fabric at her collar aside. The silver pendant slipped free. Kaler went completely still. His gaze fixed on the crescent surrounding the four-pointed star engraved into its surface. Eloan immediately covered it. Too late. Where did you get that? His voice had changed. Not anger. Recognition. It belonged to my mother. What was her name? Eloan stepped backward. Her mother's warning screamed through her memory. Never let anyone in the royal house see what you carry. I should return to my duties. She turned toward the door. Eloan. She stopped because of the strange pain in his voice. When she looked back, Kaler was staring not at her face but at the place where the pendant had disappeared beneath her dress. That symbol, he said quietly, was removed from every royal record 20 years ago. The room seemed suddenly colder. Eloan had expected questions about her mother. She had expected suspicion. She had not expected this. Why? She whispered. Kaler's jaw tightened. Because the family who carried it was declared extinct. The door opened before either could continue. Royal Advisor Cedric entered holding a stack of sealed documents. His polite expression remained unchanged until his eyes settled on Eloan. Then, for barely a heartbeat, all color left his face. Eloan recognized him immediately. In her first life, Cedric had been among the first men to call her a liar. She lowered her gaze before he could read recognition in hers. Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty, Cedric said. The council is waiting. Kaler nodded, but Cedric was no longer looking at the king. His attention remained fixed on Eloan's concealed pendant. She left the map room without another word. By the time she reached the servants' staircase, one truth had become impossible to ignore. Returning to the palace had changed the timeline sooner than she expected. And someone who should have believed her family was gone had just looked at her as though the dead had returned. By nightfall, Eloan understood that Cedric's fear was more dangerous than his suspicion. In her first life, the royal advisor had barely acknowledged her until the accusations began. Now, less than a week after her arrival, he knew she carried the symbol of a family erased from royal history. That knowledge forced her to change her plans. Waiting quietly for answers was no longer safe. After the servants' evening meal, Eloan volunteered to return linens to the western wing, giving herself a reason to pass the old royal archive. She remembered the crescent and four-pointed star carved above the nearby doorway, the same symbol hidden on her pendant. The corridor was empty when she reached it. Instead of entering the archive, she stopped beneath the carving and pressed her fingers against the cold stone. Nothing happened. Then she removed the pendant and held it near the symbol. A faint click sounded inside the wall. Eloan froze. A narrow panel shifted less than an inch from its frame. Her mother had not merely possessed a forgotten royal emblem. Someone had built parts of Blackthorn Palace to recognize it. She slipped through the opening and discovered a small chamber no larger than a pantry. Dust-covered wooden shelves and several empty document boxes. Someone had cleared the room long ago, but not completely. On the floor beneath a cabinet lay a torn piece of parchment bearing 3 faded words, Mooncrest Household Registry. Eloan's breath caught. Mooncrest. The name awakened a memory from childhood, her mother humming an old lullaby about wolves who guarded the moonlit crown. She had always believed it was only a song. Footsteps sounded outside. Eloan returned the parchment to the floor, closed the hidden panel, and barely managed to conceal the pendant before a lantern appeared around the corner. Cedric approached alone. New servants are not permitted in this corridor after evening bell. His voice was pleasant, almost gentle. Eloan lowered her head. I was returning linens and became confused. Interesting. He glanced toward the wall behind her. You seemed remarkably certain of your direction earlier today. Every instinct warned her not to challenge him. In her first life, she had survived by explaining herself until other people decided whether her explanations deserved belief. She would not repeat that mistake. Then I will return to the servants' wing. Cedric stepped aside, allowing her to pass. Your mother, he said casually. Eloan stopped. The king mentioned your pendant belonged to her. What was her name? There it was. Not curiosity. A search for confirmation. Eloan made a decision. If Cedric already suspected who she was, giving him the true name would only strengthen whatever plan he was forming. May, she answered, using the shortened name her mother had once used while traveling. Cedric smiled. Of course. But his relief told Eloan more than his words. He had expected another answer. She walked away without looking back. That small lie created an immediate advantage. Cedric now believed his suspicion might be wrong. Yet it also created a new danger. If he investigated May and found nothing, he would return with sharper questions. Eloan needed the truth before he did. The next morning, Kaler summoned her again, but this time not to the map room. He waited inside the royal archive. Eloan stopped at the doorway. Your Majesty. Come in. Several ancient ledgers rested on the table. Kaler's expression was controlled, but exhaustion shadowed his eyes. I searched for your symbol. Eloan's pulse quickened. You said the records were removed. They were. He opened an empty leather binding. Pages had been carefully cut from its spine. Someone did not want the Mooncrest family forgotten by accident. They wanted them erased. Hearing the name from him confirmed that the hidden chamber was real. Evidence, not coincidence. Kaler looked at her. Last night I dreamed of you again. Eloan went still. Again? The word escaped before she could stop it. Kaler noticed. You knew? She could not answer without revealing too much. His gaze sharpened, but there was no anger in it. Only confusion and something painfully familiar. In the dream, he continued, you were standing in this palace, asking me to believe you. The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. That moment belonged to another lifetime. It belonged to the day everything had begun to collapse. Kaler took one careful step toward her. I could not hear what you were accused of. I only knew that I had failed you. Eloan backed away. Dreams are not memories. Then why are you afraid whenever mine come close to yours? Before she could respond, the archive doors opened. Cedric entered with two clerks carrying sealed record boxes. His gaze moved from Kaler to Eloan and then to the empty binding on the table. For the first time, his calm expression truly broke. Your Majesty, he said quietly, those records were sealed by your father's order. Kaler turned toward him. Then perhaps it is time someone explained why. Cedric hesitated. That hesitation changed the room. Eloan had seen Kaler doubt her once. Now, for the first time in either lifetime, she watched doubt turn toward the man who had helped destroy her. And she understood that by returning differently, she had already forced the king to make a choice he had never made before. Instead of accepting the story placed before him, Kaler had decided to question who wrote it. Cedric recovered quickly, but Eloan had already seen what he wanted hidden. Your Majesty, some histories were sealed because reopening them could threaten the stability your father spent his reign protecting. Kaler rested one hand on the empty ledger. Stability built on missing pages is simply ignorance with a royal seal. Cedric's expression tightened. Then allow me to investigate properly. No, the single word silenced the archive. You will leave the records here. Cedric bowed, but as he turned away, his eyes found Eloan. There was no uncertainty in them. Now. Her lie about her mother's name had bought her only one night. After he left, Kaler dismissed the clerks and examined the sealed boxes himself. Eloan should have returned to her duties. Instead, she remained because another detail had caught her attention. One box carried the crescent and four-pointed star beneath a layer of black wax. That one, she said before caution could stop her. Kaylor looked at her. Why? Eloan touched the pendant beneath her dress. He understood without asking. The box contained household accounts, old correspondence, and a registry dated 21 years earlier. Several names had been removed, but one entry survived near the bottom of a damaged page. Mooncrest women traditionally served as keepers of the Lunar Covenant. Eloan read the sentence twice. What is the Lunar Covenant? Kaylor moved toward another shelf. A ceremonial agreement between the crown and the oldest wolf families. I was taught that it ended generations ago. Then why was my family keeping it 21 years ago? He had no answer. That frightened her more than a convenient explanation would have. A folded letter slipped from between two account books. Most of the ink had faded, but a sentence remained legible. The child must remain hidden until the crown can distinguish guardian from traitor. Eloan's fingers turned cold. The child. She calculated the date. It had been written the year she was born. Kaylor read it over her shoulder and stepped back immediately when he noticed how tense she became. Eloan, whoever wrote this may have been referring to someone else. You do not believe that? No, his honesty hurt, but it also gave her something she had never received from him in her first life. Truth before certainty. Eloan folded the letter carefully. My mother spent her entire life hiding me. From whom? She never told me. Then another memory returned. Her mother's final winter. A locked cottage door. Curtains closed before sunset. A warning repeated whenever riders passed along the distant road. If anyone from Blackthorn asks your name, give them only May. Eloan's breath caught. May had not been a name she invented to deceive Cedric. Her mother had prepared it years before. He knew, she whispered. Cedric? Kaylor asked. Maybe not everything. But when he asked my mother's name, he was waiting for a specific answer. Kaylor's expression hardened. What was her real name? Eloan hesitated. Giving him the truth felt like placing her old life directly into the hands of the man who had once failed to protect it. But refusing would leave Cedric controlling the only information they possessed. She chose the risk. Seraphine Mooncrest. Kaylor went utterly still. Eloan saw recognition immediately. You know that name. He crossed to a locked cabinet and removed a narrow book bearing the personal crest of the previous king. After several pages, he stopped. Seraphine Mooncrest served my mother. Eloan stared at him. The queen? Until the year I was born. Then every reference to her disappears. Before either could speak again, the archive bell rang 3 times. Not an alarm, but a royal summons from the council chamber. A guard appeared at the doorway moments later. Your Majesty, the council requests your immediate presence. A formal complaint has been submitted concerning a servant accused of entering restricted royal chambers. Eloan did not need to ask which servant. The timeline had changed, and Cedric had changed with it. In her first life, he had waited years before turning the palace against her. This time, her questions had forced him to move within days. Kaylor looked from the guard to Eloan. Who submitted the complaint? Royal advisor Cedric. The old fear returned so quickly that Eloan almost tasted it. Accusation. Council. A king deciding whether she deserved belief. History was rebuilding itself around her, only faster. She expected Kaylor to order her confined while he investigated. Instead, he closed the ledger and handed it directly to her. Keep this with you. Why? Because if Cedric wants you removed from the palace immediately after we found your mother's name, then your presence here frightens him more than your supposed crime concerns him. Eloan searched his face. You believe me? Kaylor's eyes held hers. I believe someone is trying very hard to make certain I never get the chance. For the first time since awakening in her second life, Eloan felt the future separate completely from the past. Kaylor had been given the beginning of the same lie, but this time he had made a different decision. And somewhere beyond the archive doors, that decision was about to force everyone else to change theirs. The council chamber looked exactly as Eloan remembered it, and that frightened her more than anything Cedric could say. 12 carved chairs surrounded a long black table beneath the silver crest of the crown. Kalar took his place at its head while Eloan remained several feet behind him, clutching the ledger he had trusted to her. Cedric stood across the room with calm dignity, as though the accusation were merely an unfortunate duty. This servant entered a sealed corridor after evening bell, he began. She concealed her purpose, gave questionable information about her family, and has now gained access to restricted royal records. Murmurs moved around the table. Eloan recognized the pattern. Suspicion first. Repetition second. Certainty last. In her first life, she had tried desperately to answer every accusation. Each explanation had created another question until fear made her sound guilty even when she was telling the truth. This time she remained silent. Kalar noticed. "You have nothing to say?" Cedric asked her. "I will answer the king," Eloan replied, "not the story you have already written about me." The room became still. Cedric's pleasant expression hardened. "Then answer him. Why were you near the sealed corridor?" Eloan looked at Kalar. She could hide the chamber and preserve her advantage, but secrecy had helped destroy her once before. She made a different choice. "Because the symbol on my pendant appears above a hidden door there." Several council members exchanged startled looks. Cedric did not. That was enough. Kalar leaned forward. "You knew about the door." Cedric's gaze shifted toward him. "Your Majesty, I know many features of this palace." "That was not my question." Silence stretched between them. Finally Cedric said, "The chamber belonged to an obsolete royal household." Eloan's pulse quickened. He had confirmed it himself. "Mooncrest?" she asked. Cedric looked at her, realizing too late what he had surrendered. Kalar rose. "You told me those records were sealed because of my father's concerns about stability. You neglected to mention that you knew where the Mooncrest chamber was. Because it changes nothing. It changes what you knew before you accused her." The council murmurs grew louder. Cedric's strategy had created the opposite consequence from the one he intended. By forcing Eloan into public scrutiny, he had forced himself to answer publicly as well. His next decision came quickly. Then perhaps the council should see what she is hiding. His eyes settled on Eloan's collar. "Ask your maid to show them her pendant." Eloan's hand instinctively covered it. Kalar's expression darkened. "She is not required to surrender a family possession to satisfy your curiosity." "Not curiosity, Your Majesty. History." Cedric turned toward the council. The Mooncrest line was not erased because it was innocent. There it was. The next lie, prepared before the first had failed. Eloan felt the old fear rising again, but now she understood something she had not understood in her first life. Cedric needed everyone to fear her bloodline before they learned what it meant. "Then open the records," she said. Cedric stared at her. "All of them. If my family was dangerous, prove it." Kalar's gaze moved to the ledger in her hands. "Agreed." Cedric's composure finally cracked. "Some documents cannot be unsealed without consequences." "You wanted judgment," Kalar replied. "You will have truth first." Before Cedric could object, an elderly councilwoman named Lady Isolde slowly rose from her chair. She had remained silent throughout the hearing. Now she stared at Eloan with tears gathering in her eyes. "May I see the pendant?" Eloan hesitated, then drew the silver chain carefully from beneath her dress. The crescent and four-pointed star caught the firelight. Lady Isolde covered her mouth. "Seraphine," she whispered. Eloan's breath stopped. "You knew my mother?" The woman looked toward Kalar. "I knew what she protected." Cedric immediately stepped forward. "Lady Isolde, this is neither the time nor place. For 21 years, you have decided when the time was appropriate." Her voice trembled, but not from fear. I will not wait another 21. Kaler moved around the table. Tell me. Lady Isolde looked at Eloan again. The Mooncrests were never traitors. They were guardians of the Lunar Covenant. And Seraphine disappeared because someone discovered that her newborn daughter carried the last living claim needed to restore it. Eloan felt the room disappear around her. Her mother had not hidden her because she was ashamed of what Eloan was. She had hidden her because Eloan mattered. Kaler spoke quietly. What claim? Lady Isolde's answer came with devastating simplicity. The covenant that determines whether the crown's mate bond is true or manufactured. Kaler went motionless. So did Cedric. Eloan looked between them as another memory surfaced from her first life. The accusations against her had begun only weeks before Kaler was expected to formally recognize another woman as his chosen Luna. Suddenly the timing no longer seemed accidental. Lady Isolde stepped closer to Eloan. Your mother was protecting more than your identity. She was protecting the one person capable of proving when a royal bond had been falsified. Kaler's face lost all color. His dreams. His wolf's grief. The impossible recognition he felt whenever Eloan entered a room. Pieces that had never belonged together were beginning to form a shape neither of them was ready to name. Cedric backed toward the council doors. Kaler saw him move. You wanted her removed from my palace, he said. Now I want to know why. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, Eloan watched Cedric realize that accusing her had not isolated her. It had forced the truth into a room full of witnesses. The truth did not free Eloan. It made her dangerous to everyone who had survived by keeping it buried. Before the council could demand answers, Cedric made his next decision. If Lady Isolde's claim is true, then the girl cannot remain an ordinary servant, he said. The Lunar Covenant concerns succession, royal bonds, and the stability of the crown. Until her identity is verified, she should be removed from palace affairs. The suggestion sounded reasonable. That was what made it dangerous. Eloan understood immediately. Cedric no longer needed the council to believe she was guilty. He only needed them to isolate her before she could prove anything. Several council members nodded uncertainly. Kaler did not. You accused her of trespassing because you wanted an investigation. The investigation revealed information you concealed. Now you want the person who uncovered it removed. Cedric's face remained composed. I want the kingdom protected. So do I. Kaler turned to Lady Isolde. Can the covenant be verified? Yes, but not from the records in this chamber. The original covenant was kept beneath the old moon chapel. Cedric's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Eloan saw it. So did Kaler. Then we go there, the king said. Lady Isolde hesitated. The chapel was sealed after Queen Evelyn died. Kaler's mother. Eloan remembered the name from the ledger and understood another connection had surfaced. Seraphine Mooncrest had served Queen Evelyn until Kaler's birth. Then Seraphine disappeared, the Mooncrest records were erased, and the old chapel was sealed. None of those events were separate anymore. They were consequences of the same hidden decision. An hour later, Kaler, Eloan, Lady Isolde, and 2 royal guards descended beneath the western wing. Cedric was ordered to remain with the council while his authority over royal records was temporarily suspended. The consequence was immediate. For the first time in decades, he could no longer control what the king was allowed to discover. The underground passage ended before a circular stone door marked with the crescent and 4-pointed star. There was no handle. Eloan slowly removed her pendant. My mother told me never to let anyone from Blackthorn see this. Lady Isolde's eyes filled with sadness. She was trying to keep you alive long enough to return here by your own choice. Eloan pressed the pendant into a shallow impression in the stone. A soft mechanical sound traveled through the door, and it opened several inches. Kaler stared at her. Only a Mooncrest could open it. Only the last keeper, Lady Isolde answered. Inside, moonlight entered through a narrow opening high above, illuminating a small altar and a silver-bound book untouched by the destruction of the royal archives. Eloan approached it slowly. Her hands trembled as she opened the cover. The first pages described the covenant as something far different from the ceremonial tradition Kaler had been taught. The Mooncrest Keepers had once served as independent witnesses to royal mate bonds. Their purpose was not to choose a king's mate, but to prevent magic, political pressure, or false ritual from being used to manufacture one. Kaler turned several pages before stopping. His expression hardened. This entry is dated the year I was born. Lady Isolde closed her eyes. Eloan read the faded writing. Queen Evelyn had discovered an attempt to alter the future bond of her infant son. She had ordered Seraphine to protect the evidence and disappear with the surviving Mooncrest heir. The person responsible was not named on that page. But another sentence changed everything. The false bond could only remain stable while the true witness remained hidden. Eloan felt the pendant warming against her palm. Kaler looked at her as though the answer frightened him more than any enemy ever had. That is why your return changed something. His dreams had started before she entered the palace, after she awakened into this second life and decided to return. Eloan suddenly understood the terrible possibility. Her rebirth had not simply changed her choices. It had disturbed something that had been built around her absence. A sound echoed from the passage behind them. One of the guards returned from the stairs, breathing hard. Your Majesty, a message from the council. Kaler turned. What happened? Advisor Cedric is gone. Eloan's stomach dropped. The guard continued. Before leaving, he ordered the Northern Record Vault emptied under an emergency authority bearing the late king's seal. Kaler looked toward the silver book. Cedric had failed to isolate Eloan, so he had made a new decision: destroy whatever evidence remained beyond his control. That decision forced theirs. Seal every palace gate, Kaler ordered. Then he looked at Eloan. You stay with me. The words awakened an old fear. In her first life, she had surrendered her choices because powerful people claimed protection required obedience. No, Kaler stared at her. Eloan held his gaze despite the pounding of her heart. I came back here because I chose to find the truth. I will not become another secret someone locks away for my own protection. For a long moment, the Alpha King said nothing. Then something in his expression softened. You are right. He removed the royal signet from his hand and placed it on the altar before her. Then I will not command you. I will ask you. Help me uncover what happened to our families. Our families. Not his kingdom. Not her bloodline. Both. Eloan looked at the man who had once failed to believe her and realized the cruelest part of her second life was becoming clear. Kaler was changing into the man she had once needed him to be. And she still remembered exactly what loving the man he used to be had cost her. By midnight, every gate of Blackthorn Palace was sealed, but Cedric had already made his escape, leaving behind a far more dangerous question: what evidence had frightened him enough to abandon the king he had advised for years? Kaler ordered trusted guards to protect the Northern Record Vault while Eloan and Lady Isolde searched the silver-bound Covenant book for anything Cedric might be desperate to erase. Near the final pages, Eloan found a folded document written in her mother's hand. She recognized the graceful lettering immediately. For several seconds she could not unfold it. Kaler remained beside her without speaking. He did not reach for the letter or command her to read it. He simply waited until she chose. Eloan finally opened the page. Seraphine had written that Queen Evelyn discovered a faction within the royal court attempting to control Kaler's future through a false mate recognition. The plan required the destruction of the Mooncrest witnesses and the removal of every record explaining how a true royal bond could be verified. Queen Evelyn chose to expose them. Seraphine chose to save the last Mooncrest child. Those decisions created everything that followed. There is more, Eloan whispered. Near the bottom, one sentence had been written darker than the others: if my daughter ever returns willingly to Blackthorn, the Covenant will awaken, and what was hidden from the Alpha heir will begin returning through dreams. Kaler slowly lowered himself into the chair beside the altar. My dreams began 7 nights before you arrived. Eloan calculated backward. 7 nights before entering the palace was the night she had accepted the royal employment letter. The night she chose to return. Her rebirth alone had not awakened the covenant. Her decision had. Kaler looked at her. Then what I have been seeing, may be pieces of the life I remember. Neither of them spoke for several heartbeats. Eloan had feared this possibility, but hearing it confirmed changed something inside her. Kaler was no longer simply experiencing unexplained grief. The truth she carried alone was beginning to reach him. There is something I have not told you, she said. His attention sharpened. I know. She looked at him in surprise. You walk through this palace like someone remembering it, not learning it. You knew Cedric before he introduced himself. You knew where fear would come from before anyone threatened you. Eloan's throat tightened. She could still choose silence. But every hidden truth had given Cedric room to shape another lie. I have been here before, she said. Not as a child. Not in another palace appointment. In another life. Kaler did not interrupt. I served here for years. I trusted people who eventually turned against me. Cedric helped build an accusation around me, and everyone found it easier to believe because I was an Omega Maid with no family name. Her voice weakened only when she reached the part she had carried deepest. And you were there. Kaler's face changed. What did I do? Eloan looked into his eyes. Nothing. The word hurt more than anger would have. That was what destroyed me. You did not condemn me. You did not defend me. You doubted me long enough for everyone else's lie to become my truth. Kaler closed his eyes. A memory struck him before he could answer. A crowded royal chamber. Eloan standing alone. His own hand resting on the council table while Cedric demanded judgment. Her eyes searching his face. His silence. Kaler staggered back from the altar, breathing unevenly. I remember. Eloan froze. He looked at her with horror and grief. Not everything. But I remember your face. For the first time, the pain of her first life belonged to both of them. Kaler could have apologized. Instead, he made a harder choice. You do not owe me forgiveness because I remember failing you. Eloan's eyes filled with tears. No, and whatever this covenant says about us, you do not owe me a bond. That mattered more than any declaration of love could have. The entire conspiracy had been built around controlling choice, controlling truth, controlling whom a king was permitted to recognize. Kaler was refusing to repeat it. Before Eloan could answer, the chapel door opened and a royal guard entered carrying a sealed metal case recovered from the northern vault. Cedric had ordered every document inside it destroyed, but the guards had intercepted the command before it could be carried out. Kaler broke the old royal seal. Inside lay correspondence bearing Cedric's signature and another name Eloan recognized from her first life, Lady Vespera, the noblewoman Kaler had once been expected to recognize as Luna. The letters documented years of manipulated records, false testimony, and preparations for a manufactured bond ceremony. Then Eloan found the final document. It was dated 3 years in the future from their current timeline, yet she remembered the circumstances surrounding it perfectly. It contained the framework of the accusation that had eventually destroyed her reputation. Her supposed crime had not arisen from suspicion at all. It had been prepared years before she committed any action they could accuse her of. Kaler stared at the page. They had already chosen you as the person they would blame. Eloan finally understood why no explanation had saved her in the first life. She had never been fighting an accusation. She had been walking into a role written for her before she entered the palace. Kaler closed the case. Dawn was beginning to brighten the opening above the chapel. Then we do not chase Cedric, he said. We make him come back. Eloan understood immediately. Cedric had fled because the truth was hidden. If that truth became public, fleeing would no longer protect the system he had built. She looked at the Silver Covenant book, then at the evidence her mother had died protecting. "Call the kingdom to witness," she said. Kaylor met her eyes. "And this time, no one decides who you are before you speak." At noon, the great bells of Blackthorn Palace rang across the capital, not for a coronation or a victory, but for a truth the crown had hidden for 21 years. Kaylor ordered the great hall open to council members, noble houses, palace servants, and representatives from the surrounding packs. Eloan stood beside Lady Isolde before the raised throne, wearing the same simple sage dress she had worn as a maid. Kaylor had offered her formal clothing from the royal household. She had refused. If the kingdom was going to learn who she was, it would see the woman it had been taught to overlook. On the table before them rested the silver-bound covenant book, Seraphine's letter, and the correspondence recovered from the northern vault. Kaylor did not sit on his throne. He stood beside Eloan. That choice spread through the hall more powerfully than any proclamation. Lady Isolde read the surviving covenant records aloud. Then Kaylor presented the letters proving that royal records had been manipulated and that preparations for a false mate ceremony had existed for years. Murmurs became disbelief, then anger, then painful silence as people understood how many lives had been shaped by a manufactured history. Lady Vespera arrived before the final letter was read. She entered without jewels or ceremony, her face pale but composed. "I received your summons," she said. Kaylor studied her. "Your name appears throughout Cedric's correspondence." "I know." Eloan expected denial. Instead, Vespera placed a sealed packet on the table. "And that is why I came." She explained that Cedric had approached her family years earlier, promising that an alliance with Kaylor was destined and politically necessary. Vespera had believed him. When she later discovered documents suggesting the bond ritual had been manipulated, she had remained silent because exposing it would destroy her family's standing. "My silence protected the lie," she admitted before the entire hall. "For that, I accept judgment. But I will not protect it anymore." Her decision broke the last shelter Cedric possessed. The packet contained instructions he had sent that morning, ordering Vespera to leave the capital and publicly accuse Eloan of manipulating the king. Instead, Vespera had brought the evidence directly to Kaylor. Before the council could respond, the great doors opened. Cedric entered between royal guards. He had attempted to leave through an abandoned northern checkpoint, but when word of the public hearing spread through the city, the officers stationed there refused his emergency authority and returned him to the palace. Cedric looked across the crowded hall and understood that the world he controlled through private whispers had become a room full of witnesses. "You have mistaken old superstition for truth," he said. Kaylor's voice remained calm. "Then explain the letters." "I protected the crown. By choosing what I was allowed to know." A king cannot always be permitted personal freedom when a kingdom requires stability. Eloan felt the meaning beneath those words. That belief had shaped everything. Cedric had decided that control was protection. That decision had led to erased families, manufactured bonds, false accusations, and finally his own exposure. Kaylor looked toward Eloan. "And what did she have to lose for your stability?" Cedric did not answer. Eloan stepped forward. She could have revealed everything about her first life. She could have demanded that the room understand exactly what his choices had cost her. But she no longer needed suffering to prove her worth. "My mother spent her life hiding because men like you believed other people's choices belonged to the crown," she said. "I will not continue that world by asking the crown to choose my future. For me." Then she placed the mooncrest pendant beside the covenant book. Lady Isolde explained the final rite. The keeper could reveal whether a royal bond had been manipulated, but the rite could not command love, marriage, or loyalty. It could reveal truth only. Nothing more. Eloan agreed. The pendant warmed beneath her hand. Kaylor closed his eyes as memories flooded back, not only fragments now, but the terrible clarity of another life. He remembered Eloan standing alone before the council. He remembered choosing caution when courage had been required. He remembered watching her leave the hall believing she had no one. When he opened his eyes, grief transformed his face. The hall waited for the king to announce what the covenant had revealed. Kalar did something else. He stepped down from the throne and faced Eloan as an equal. "I remember failing you," he said. "And I will carry that truth whether you choose me or not." Eloan's eyes filled with tears. "The covenant says our bond is true," he continued, "but I will not use destiny to claim what only you can give." No command followed. No demand for forgiveness. Eloan realized this was the moment her second life had been moving toward. Not the moment when a powerful king chose an unwanted Omega, but the moment when she finally possessed the freedom to choose for herself. Weeks later, Cedric was removed from royal authority and placed before an independent council for judgment. Vespera surrendered her political claim and remained to testify about the false bond scheme. The erased Mooncrest records were restored, and Seraphine's name was entered into the royal history as the woman who protected both the covenant and the kingdom's freedom of choice. Eloan did not become Luna that day. She remained at Blackthorn because she chose to stay, no longer as an invisible maid but as the restored keeper of the Lunar Covenant. Kalar courted her without command, without prophecy, and without expecting forgiveness as payment for regret. Months passed before Eloan finally stood with him beneath the winter roses. "In my first life," she whispered, "I wanted you to choose me." Kalar's expression softened. "And now?" Eloan looked toward the palace that had once represented the end of her story. "Now I choose myself first." He smiled gently. "As you should." She reached for his hand only then. "And from there, I choose you." Above them, the crimson banners moved against a clear winter sky. Eloan had returned to the place where she once disappeared, but she had not returned to become someone else's destiny. She had returned to reclaim her name, her truth, and her right to decide what love would mean. And only after she no longer needed a king to prove her worth did she finally become the woman a king was worthy to stand beside.